Okay, let's get started. This is where we left off last time, and we had walked through the different rates of return that they showed in table 8.4. And because we have those answers there, when we put those rates in and we got the same numbers, we knew that our spreadsheet was correct. However, when you get out into the real world, will there be the correct answers there for you to compare against? Ms. Rafael, how often do you see the correct answer in your line of work? Never, right? Okay, so here's what we got to do. When you build a spreadsheet, one of the things that you want to do is check the spreadsheet with your calculator, because after all, you guys are masters of the TI-BA2 Plus. You should be able to use the calculator to produce a result that is very, very close to what we're seeing here. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull my calculator up. You should get yours out. And we are going to use the CF keys. We're going to say CF, second, clear work. What should I put in for CF 0? Yeah, negative 260,000. Negative. Enter. Arrow down. What is C01?
39,800.
Yeah, 39,800. Enter. Let me see if I can change the format to put a comma in there. Oh, come on. Because that makes it easier to see. Format cells, number, separator, say. Yeah, there we go. Okay, now, let's see, back to the, gonna arrow down. What's that 01?
1.
Yeah, in fact, it's always going to be 1 because look, none of these numbers repeat. Arrow down. See 02, 5, 4, 1, 9, 2. Enter. Arrow down, arrow down. Let's see 03.
66,000.
Very good. 845.76. Ms. Roll, I appreciate your enthusiasm. Enter. Arrow down, arrow down. Ms. Minahan, what's C04?
It's going to be the 59,000.
Yeah, 59,985.70.
89.
Oh, very good, thank you. 59,895.7. 95.7. Enter. Arrow down, C05. 224,649.63. Enter. Is that our last year? Yes, that's our last year. Okay, now, in order to test this thing, so we've got it set for 10% right now. I'm going to put 10 in here, hit enter, arrow down, compute. And we're coming out within a penny. And the reason we're not coming out exact is because there are more than 2 decimal places in this. You know, when you get out this far, there are more than 2 decimal places. Now, so that's how we check this. Now, let's leave that stuff in your calculator. Don't clear it out. And I also want to show you how to do IRR here. Because remember, I told you that IRR is so easy to calculate once you already have the stuff together for NPV. And it turns out that the formula for IRR in Excel is really easy and it works well. Remember, the NPV formula is kind of janky. And if your NPV is not coming out correct in your spreadsheet, there's a good chance that you've messed that up. Remember, the NPV formula starts at time 1 and goes on and gives you the present value of all that stuff at time 0. So at the end, you have to add this time 0 cash flow, which is negative. Okay, so in fact, let's go ahead and look at that. There it is, right? You got to add back that original cash flow. Now let's do IRR equals IRR, in case you couldn't have guessed. And then all I have to do is just select those, hit close parentheses, and hit enter. And it gives me this long old thing here. Now remember, if you look back to table 8.4 on page 2, well anyway, table 8.4, yeah, it says that the IRR, basically it says IRR is 15.67. How do we know from table 8.4 that the IRR they think is 15.67? Any ideas? Yeah, the NPV is zero. Remember, the definition of IRR is the discount rate that makes NPV equal to zero. So let's see if that's correct. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change this rate up here. I'm going to say equal to, and then I'm going to select the IRR, and boom, there we go. Makes NPV equal to zero. So there were two things keeping it from being exactly 15.67%. Number one, remember we didn't round the dollars and cents on the prices and costs of the balls. And number two, there's other numbers out there. It's not a short number. And so that's why it wasn't coming out exactly even. So I'm going to put that back where it was. Are there any questions? Okay, one last thing on Excel before we get out of it. I'm going to show you an answer to a common question. Do you remember back when we were looking at IRR and we said that if you've got more than one sign change, you're going to have more than one IRR? And we said the calculator would give you the first one, but it won't give you anything beyond that. And the question is, how in the world then am I going to figure out what that other one was? Remember, I just told you it was 20%, but how did we get there? And the answer is, we can do something like this. Remember, the definition of IRR is NPV equals zero at that discount rate. So what I did is I just created a bunch of rates over here, and I'm going to keep running that rate up until I get to zero, which happens to be in the neighborhood of 10%. Notice it's exactly zero at 10%. That's what that little line means. But here's the trick. How do you know when you've done it? When you switch from negative NPV to positive NPV, or from positive NPV to negative NPV. Now we could have gotten 10% from our calculator, but how are we going to find the other one? We're going to crank it on up here, and we're noticing that the NPV is now falling. And here we are. Once again at 20%, we see that it's the zero, and we see it was positive before that and negative after it. Now, that's the way you can find this other one without being some sort of mathematical genius. I keep seeing these things on Amazon, and they keep saying they're better now, but it's $40 and I'm cheap, right? So forget it. Okay, any questions about the Excel project here? What assumption do we make about opportunity costs at the end of the project? Yeah, we get them back, right? What assumption do we make about net working capital at the end of the project? It goes to what? Okay, net working capital at the end of the project, what does that amount go to? Zero, right? We get all that money back. Because we get our cash back, we get, we basically no longer have any inventory or finished goods or accounts receivable or accounts payable associated with that thing. Once we take care of all that, then the money just goes back to the mothership. Yes?
Do we assume that the opportunity cost will be the same?
Yes. This is something we discussed after class last time. Remember, I said that we had negative 150,000 on the way out for the building, and it was positive 150,000 at the end. And so when I first started giving this talk was back in 2006, and actually a little before that. And people would say, oh, but real estate values always go up, so we should have a higher number at the end than at the beginning. And I said, real estate doesn't always go up, and they called me an idiot. Now, move forward to 2009. What's happened in the meantime? Financial crisis, mortgage crash, real estate, right? Our real estate expert is not with us today, but I bet his mom was not happy. So the real estate boom just comes crashing down. And what do you think happened then when I would give the talk? People would say, wait a minute, we know real estate goes down, so you should have a lower number at the end. And I would say, no, we just don't know. The answer is we don't know. So our very best guess is that we'll be able to get the same amount of money out of it at the end as we put into it at the beginning. So that's our assumption. And once again, remember, everything that we're doing here is a swag, a scientific wild-ass guess. Our best guess is that we're going to get that money back at the end. We can't know above or below, right? Questions? I can tell you this with almost certainty. Will our assumption be correct? No. No. If you can tell the future like that, come to my office. We'll get rich together. Any questions? Okay, now let's move back to our slides. Okay, now let's talk about inflation and capital budgeting. So we've talked earlier in chapter 5, when we were talking about bonds, we talked about real rates of return and nominal rates of return. Does anyone remember what made the difference between those things? Mr. Murders.
Inflation.
Yeah, inflation. And so we said that the nominal rate of return talked about the number of units of currency that you were going to be receiving for having made the investment. We didn't talk at all about what those things could buy. And what that stuff can buy has a lot to do, in fact, a bunch to do with inflation. Now, what about the real return? In real return, we talked about your increase in your ability to consume as a result of having made an investment. And the example I gave was if you could buy 10 pizzas at the beginning and you took that money instead and put it in the bank, and at the end you had enough to buy 11 pizzas, then your real return was 11 minus 10 over 10, or 10%. Did we say anything about the number of units of currency? No. And so real is all about your ability to consume. Now, when we start looking at projects, we have to ask ourselves, are we looking at nominal numbers or are we looking at real numbers? Well, our first clue comes from where we got our weighted average cost of capital. We got those numbers from existing returns in the market. Do you think the returns that we see in the market are nominal or real? Yeah, they're nominal. They have to be. And so whenever you loan someone money, not only do you have your demanded real return, you've got your expectation of inflation built in there. This is something that the people that loan me money for my house at 3.375% fail to take into account, right? Right now, with inflation the way it is, they're actually paying me to borrow money from them. My real return, their real return on that is negative. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, that's usually the way that we do things is with nominal values, and that means that the cash flows that we use need to be nominal also. So nominal cash flows, we would take into account inflation. And so the future, let's assume that the project would have produced real cash flows that were the same across the board. If we account for inflation, then those cash flows will get greater as we go along, and those would be called nominal cash flows. Here's what you really need to know, and that is if we are doing a nominal discount rate, we need to use nominal cash flows. And if we are using a real discount rate, we need to use real cash flows. And it turns out that if you discount the nominal cash flows with a nominal discount rate, you get exactly the same outcome as if you discount the real return, or the real cash flows with the real return. And so they're exactly the same. In fact, I'll demonstrate to you why that is. So here we have present value, and we're going to start with the nominal. And I'm going to use big FV for nominal, and I'm going to use a big R, just like we did with the Fisher effect. Now, if I know one thing, I do know that inflation compounds just like interest. Did you know that? Inflation compounds just like interest. So if something cost $1 at the beginning of this year and inflation is 10%, at the end of the year it's going to cost $1.10. That $1.10 is the new basis for the judgment of inflation. If it's another 10%, it's not gonna be just $1.20 at the end of the year, it's gonna be $1.21. So inflation compounds. So what does this mean? It means that this could be, and I'm gonna make the little FV here be real, times 1 plus h to the t power. Does anyone remember what h stands for? Inflation. What's the other thing we use to represent inflation? Pi. Why don't I use it? Confuses the fire out of people, right? Okay, now let's talk about it down here. 1 plus r is actually 1 plus little r times 1 plus h. And that whole thing is to the t power. Are you with me so far? Okay. What happens then if we expand this thing out? Turns out I can write it like this. 1 plus little r to the t times 1 plus h to the t. What happens to the 1 plus h to the t's? Yeah, they cancel out. And so it turns out that if we discount the nominal numbers with the nominal rate, we get exactly the same present value for those future cash flows as if we took the real cash flows and discounted them at the real rate. And this is why, because the inflation stuff crosses out. Questions? Yeah.
So just to clarify, if we do have a problem that asks us for like the real rate and we're given a nominal and inflation, can we just use that to get the real rate?
Yeah. And so you're going to convert back and forth using that Fisher effect for the rate. And then this multiplying by 1 plus h to the t is how you convert a real future cash flow to a nominal. Now let me ask you this question. And in fact, I used to give this Excel project, and there were like 27 different things, and one of them was real, everything else was nominal. We know we've got to convert either the real to nominal or the nominal to real. If I've got one real thing and 26 nominal, what do? I convert the one, right? I convert the one, and here's why. Number one, I'm lazy. And number two, I've got one opportunity to make a mistake. If I convert the other 26 things, how many opportunities do I have to make a mistake? 26. Does that make sense? And so that's why you always want to figure out what you've got the most of and then convert the rest. My experience in industry, we always used nominal. We always used nominal. Our weighted average cost of capital, whatever we were using for our discount rate, was always nominal. And so therefore we had to figure out our cash flows on a nominal basis. Questions? Okay. And we talked about that. Now let's talk about investments of unequal lives. So sometimes we've got to choose between two items that perform exactly the same function. And if, so by performing exactly the same function, we expect that they'll produce exactly the same revenue. However, they're going to have different lengths of their lives. If they were the same length of their life, all we'd have to do is find out the present value of all the costs associated with them and take the one with the lower present value. Because after all, you don't like to spend money, and that'll give you your highest benefit to the company. But what happens when these things have lengths, lots of different lengths? Well, we're going to have to make an adjustment. So for what we're going to do here, we are only examining costs once again, and what we're going to calculate is our effective or equivalent annual cost. Now, what is an effective or an annual equivalent cost? It's where we convert these real costs, I shouldn't say real there, actual. It's where we convert the actual costs into an annuity that has the same payment so that's the definition of annuity, right? Identical payments over a set period of time, and with zero at the beginning. And so basically what we're able to do is figure it out on a per year basis. What is this thing costing us effectively? And when we do that, what we're going to do is compare the equivalent or effective annual cost between these two projects. What do you think we're going to accept? The higher cost or the lower cost? Yeah, you always want to accept the lower cost. Trust your greedy little heart. Okay, questions? So this is best shown with an example. And our example here is the tennis ball throwing machine. You guys have probably seen these before, a machine that throws tennis balls. So it's the country club, their tennis ball throwing machine is worn out. Let's talk about the country club. What is a country club? For those of you who are, so Americans, please share with our foreign guests. What is it?
It's like a gym, except for you have more outdoor and leisure activities and sports.
Oh, okay. So what are the primary sports at a country club?
Tennis,
Tennis?
swimming, and golf.
Tennis, swimming, and golf. Those are the big three things. And when I asked someone else about this in an earlier class, they also mentioned drinking. Because there's always a bar, there's usually a restaurant involved in the country club, and you have to spend so much in those things, la da 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 da. Okay, now, what's the purpose of the country club? Does anyone know?
Exclusive access.
Exclusive access. I'm going to put it this way. It's to allow rich people to stay away from poor people. Okay, now, how do we keep the poor people out of the country club?
Make it expensive.
You got to make it expensive, right? I mean, this sounds crass, but isn't this boiled down to about what it is? Yeah, okay. By the way, growing up, the only time I ever graced a country club was when I got invited by one of the rich kids, right? Okay, back to the story. So, you would think that all rich people have friends, but it's just not true. And so some of these rich people want to play tennis. They have no friends, so that's why the country club has to have the tennis ball throwing machine. And their machine is currently worn out. And so they have gone out and they have found these two machines. One of the machines costs $500 to start with, and then costs $120 for 3 years in maintenance. The other machine costs $600 to start with, and then costs $100 per year in maintenance, but it lasts 4 years. Now, what one does your heart tell you right now is going to be the better deal?
B.
Okay, very good. She says B. Anybody think A? I'm going to tell you, you really can't know until we tell you that the required rate of return is 10%. Because there are rates of return that I could throw on this thing that would make A better deal. Imagine a very high rate of return that would make the present value of those cash flows 1, 2, and 3 very low. And so as a result then, basically you would be basing your decision more on time zero than anything else. But the lower that gets, the more competitive B gets, the lower the required return gets, the more competitive B gets until eventually B overtakes A. Now, how do we do this on our calculator? So we're going to get our calculators out and we're going to say CF, second, clear work. I want to point something out to you here. Every single one of these cash flows is an expense. They all, therefore, have the same sign. Remember, we're making the assumption that the revenues are equal between these, so everything we're looking at are expenses. Now, you could say, well, wait a minute, expenses, shouldn't they all have negative signs? Hey, fine, if you want to do that, more power to you. Here's the trick. I'm lazy and I make mistakes, so what am I going to do? I'm going to make all of these expenses positive, and it's not going to hurt our analysis one bit. Okay, so what do you think CF0 for project A should be? 500. Enter. Arrow down. What's C01?
120.
120. Enter. Arrow down. What's F01?
130.
3. Very good. 3. Enter. Now, how would I find the present value for all those costs? What button would I hit next? NPV. And what is I? 10. Enter. Arrow down. Compute. So, let me interpret this number for you. The present value of all the expenses over this machine over its life, $798.42. And so here's what I'm going to do with that number, just in case everything goes horribly wrong. I'm going to say store 1. Then I'm going to hit clear a couple of times until that NPV equal goes away. Now, the second step, I'm going to use the TVN keys. I'm going to say second, clear TVN. Now, what button do you think I should hit next? PV, right, because this represents the present value. So here's what we're doing. We're crunching all these cash flows back to time 0 in the first step, and in the second step, we're blowing them out to be an annuity that has the same length of life as the machine and has the same present value of cost as the machine. Let me say that one more time. What we're doing in step 1, which we just completed, is to crunch back all these costs to time 0. And step 2 is we are going to find an annuity that has the same length of life as the machine, that also has, let's see, what else did we say about that? Same present value of cost as the machine. And when we calculate the payment for that annuity, that's going to be our equivalent annual cost. So here we go. What should I put in for N?
4,
No,
5,
no, 3. She just kept swinging at it until she hit it. I appreciate your intensity. Okay, there we go. Now, what should I put in for I per Y?
10,
10. I per Y. And then what should I compute? Yeah, compute the payment. And we can see that the equivalent annual cost for machine A is equal to $321.06. Now, what does that mean? It means that these two sets of cash flows have exactly the same duration, same length of life, and have exactly the same present value. If you took 500, 120, 120, 120, and took the present value of that at 10%, you get exactly the same if you take 0, 321.06, 321.06, 321.06. And that 321.06 is called the equivalent or effective annual cost. If you say EAC, then you always get it right, if it's equivalent or effective. Okay, now let's do the next one. CF, second, clear work. What should I put in for CF0 for machine B?
600,
Yeah, 600. Enter. Arrow down. What should I put in for C01?
100,
100. Enter. Arrow down. And what's F01?
4,
4, because there are 4 of those cash flows in a row. Now, how am I going to find the present value of that set of numbers?
NPV,
NPV. And what do I put in for I?
10,
10, very good. 10, enter, arrow down, compute. I'm getting $916.99. Now, if these two things were exactly the same length, then we would just say, well, hey, the first one's got a lower cost. Let's take it.
So we don't need to enter in future value.
No, there's no future value. No. Nope. We won't use that at all for this analysis.
Okay.
We will see, we're going to have it in the next example, we'll have a salvage value that's going to mess with things a little bit, but we still won't be using future value. Questions? Okay, now, if these were the same life, we would just choose the one with the lowest NPV, but they're not. And so what we have to do now is find out this equivalent annual cost. So here we go. I'm going to store one just in case everything goes horribly wrong. I'm going to hit clear a couple of times. And then what do I need to do before I use my PV keys? Yeah, second, clear TVM. Now, what button should I hit next?
PV,
PV, very good. And what should I do for N? Ms. Roll.
4,
Yeah, 4. And, let's see, but did I already put the I per Y of 10 in? 10, I per Y. Now, what should I compute?
payment,
Yeah, compute the payment. And this time I'm getting $289.28. Now, you go to the store and you're going to buy something, let's say it's a lawnmower. And one of those lawnmowers is gonna cost you this much a year to run, and one of them's gonna cost you this much a year to run. Which one do you choose? Yeah, the second one. Choose the second one. So that's why we're doing this. Now, most of the time, students do not get this the first time through. Would you like to see it again? Okay, we're saying that we hear a no. Do I have anybody that just wants to see it again? Wow, great. Okay, if you need to see it again and you're just shy, you can go back and watch this video again. You can watch it as many times as you want. Okay, so we always choose the one with the lower equivalent annual cost.
Sorry, can you, on the second cash flow, can you do it one more time?
Okay,
Yeah.
the second machine?
Yeah, second one.
Okay, sure.
I'm getting a wrong, different number.
Okay, let's take a look at your calculator. So, let's
You
look
say,
well, first of all, we need to turn it on. There we go. CF,
Mhm.
so that's correct.
mhm.
That's correct. Whoa, there's your problem.
Okay, that's it. Okay, thanks.
Okay, always go, yeah, you can always go back. Is that-
Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah.
No worries. Yeah, in fact, one of the things that I like to do is go back and make sure I've got everything entered in correctly. And probably about 10% of the time, I have fat thumbed something, right? Okay, now we're on to the general decision to replace. It turns out that everything in this world wears out, whether it's machines or bodies, it doesn't matter. And so what happens is, as things get older, the maintenance on them goes up, up, up. And the maintenance on them at some point goes up so high that it becomes worthwhile to replace them with a new one. Now, unfortunately, you can't do that with the human body, but you do hear about people replacing hips and things like that. So we do end up replacing stuff, and only though when it becomes financially beneficial to do so. And so we are going to replace the old machine when the cost of holding on to it for one more year is greater than the equivalent annual cost of a new machine. So we're going to be doing another equivalent annual cost calculation here for the new machine. And the first year in which the old machine, the cost to hold on to it for one more year is going to exceed the equivalent annual cost for the new machine, then we are going to replace it at that point. And so we're always spending the least amount of money possible. Okay, now the example here assumes that the revenue is going to be the same from both machines. And I'm going to tell you that's probably not the best assumption, and here's why. Every time that I looked at a new machine to replace an old machine, the new machines were more productive. What does that mean?
They have a lower maintenance cost.
Ms. Raphael?
You can get more done in the same amount of time.
Yeah, you can get more done in the same amount of time. So the assumption that the revenues are going to be the same might not be the best. But so I'm throwing that out there in case you run into this. So usually we were doing both. If I bought a new machine, it would cut the metal faster. It would be more accurate, things like that. Okay, but here we're going to assume that they're exactly the same. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We've got actually two machines here. That first bullet point with the words, that is our replacement machine. That would be a new machine. And we are told lots of information about that machine. We are also told that the required rate of return is 15%. And we see down below information about the old machine. So on your slides, I want you to mark that first bullet point as new machine, and the stuff at the bottom is old machine. So the first thing we're going to do is figure out the equivalent annual cost of the new machine. And they tell us that the replacement machine costs $9,000, requires $1,000 per year in maintenance, and has a life of 8 years, and it has a salvage value. This is a new twist. It has a salvage value at the end of its life of $2,000. So let's get our calculators out and see what we can do with that. CF, second, your work. What should I do with 9,000, or what should I do for CF0 here? 9,000, and keep in mind the sign's the same on all of these because they're all expenses. 900, enter, 9,000, sorry. It requires 1,000 per year in maintenance. What is C01? 1,000. Enter, arrow down. What is F01? Everybody says 8, but it's actually 7. Why is it 7 and not 8? Ms. Minahan, why is the last cash flow different?
Because you have your salvage value.
Yeah, because you have the salvage. Is that what you were going to say? Yeah, because you got that salvage value. And so that's why F01 is 7, enter, arrow down. And then we got to figure out what we're going to do with C02. So that last cash flow, we're spending 1,000 on maintenance, but then we sell this thing for $2,000. So I've got $2,000 here I need to do something with. Is that a plus or a minus? It's a minus because it's a cash flow in the opposite direction. Remember, all these other things are expenses. That's revenue. And so at the end, what we have is minus 1,000. That's for our last cash flow, is minus 1,000. So I'm going to put in 1,000 plus minus, enter. Is anyone not clear on how we got minus 1,000? Mr. Ali. So here's what's happening in that last year. So what we've been doing as we go along, we're paying 1,000, right? And we do that for 8 years. And right after we pay that last 1,000, we sell the machine for 2,000 bucks. So I've paid out 1,000. That's positive 1,000. If $2,000 comes back the other way, that's a negative expense, right? What is 1,000 minus 2,000?
Negative.
Yeah, negative 1,000. Does that make sense? Okay, anyone else still not clear? Okay, so now we have all of our cash flows in there. How are we going to find the present value of all these costs? NPV. And what do we put in for I? 15. 15, enter. Arrow down, compute. I'm getting $12,833.52. Are you getting anything different? Did I hear a yes?
No.
You're okay? You're good? Only grunt if you've got something bad. Go ahead, grunt. Oh, okay.
I'm joking.
She's messing with me. That ain't cool. Okay, back to the story. What do you think we're going to do with this number, just in case something goes horribly wrong? Store 1. And then I'm going to hit clear a couple of times. What do you think I'm going to do next?
PV.
Okay, close, but what do we have to clear first?
Oh, let's.
Yeah, you got to do second future value to clear your TVM. And then I'm going to hit PV. And what am I going to put in for N? 8. Very good. I heard there was a question on that. 8. Okay. 8N. And what do I put in for I per Y?
15.
15. I per Y. And then what do I compute?
Payment.
Payment. And so the equivalent annual cost for the new machine is equal to $2,859.95. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and erase this stuff because I'm going to need this board over here. Now, what does that mean? It means that we are going to replace this machine, the old machine, in the first year that the cost to keep it for one more year exceeds $2,859.95. So let's talk about the old machine and where these numbers come from. By the way, do you think the gods of finance just hand you these numbers? No. And we're projecting out 4 years. There's only one number that's likely certain up here, and that's the salvage value right now. And let's talk about how we get salvage values. So back in the day, my machine dealer's name was Rusty. I thought that was a pretty good name for a machine dealer, Rusty, because he dealt in old used machines, and they were rusty. Well, anyway, so Rusty, if I had a machine that I wanted to sell, I would call Rusty, and I would say, Rusty, how much would you give me for this machine today? And Rusty would, back then everything had hand wheels. He would run the hand wheels on it. He'd fire it up. He'd listen. He'd smell. By the way, you can tell when a machine's shorting out electrically by the smell, right? So all sorts of things he could tell. And then he'd say, write your check for $4,000 right now. Boop, there's my times zero, right? And by the way, is that number actually certain?
No.
Yeah, it is. He said he'd write a check for me right now. All I have to do is say yes, right? And he'll write me a check. By the way, do you think Rusty's going to try to hose me over? No, this is a multiple period game, right? I'm going to deal with Rusty again and again. And if Rusty treats me badly, what do I do the next time I have a machine to sell? Do I call Rusty? No, I call his ex-partner Krusty. And he comes in and, yeah, okay. So Rusty's going to shoot square with me. I can get that $4,000. And I say, okay, what if I ran this machine for one more year, 2 shifts per day, 5 days a week, 8 hours per shift, cutting aluminum? I have to tell him what I'm cutting because cutting steel would wear the machine out faster. And he says, well, I could probably give you $2,500. I've got my next number, right? And then I say, well, what if I held on to it for 2 more years? And I can tell he's starting to get a little miffed. He says, $1,500. I say, how about 3 more years? He says, $1,000. I said, what about 4 more years? And he says, you can keep your damn machine, right? At that point, he's not going to give me any money for it. So now I have my salvage value numbers. So that's one way to get them. That was in the age before the internet. How do we do it now? Well, you might go out and look online. Everybody assumes that their machine is one of a kind, but it's not. They made a boatload of them. And so what you do is you find ones that are the same age as yours, same condition, and whatever they're selling for, take like 80% of that, because you know the dealer's got to have a margin, right? Take like 80% of that, and that's going to be your salvage value for times zero. Find one that's 1 year newer or 1 year older than yours. That could be your year 1. Find one that's 2 years older. That could be your year 2, and so forth. So that would be the other way we go about this. The only way to get the times zero number for sure, though, is to get Rusty to come take a look at it. Okay, so that's how we get salvage value. Let's talk about how we get the maintenance numbers. The maintenance numbers, if you work in any decent sized organization, they're going to have a maintenance organization. And the maintenance organization or department, if they are professional, they will keep records. They will keep records. And so there will be records on what we spent previously, and you can go out there and look. And in fact, you ask your maintenance guy to come up with these numbers, and he'll tell you, he or she will tell you what they think the maintenance is going to be. And they'll throw in things that you might not catch. For instance, I was talking to my maintenance guy, Tom. I said, Tom, doing my budget for next year, anything out of the ordinary? He says, well, you can expect your maintenance costs to go up about 10% because your machines are getting older. He said, but machine 237 needs a new thrust bearing. Do I even have to know what a thrust bearing is? No. I say, how much is that going to cost me? He says, well, it'll be about $35,000 for the part and about $15,000 labor. I said, so I'm going to have to spend an extra $50,000 on this machine next year. He'd say, yeah, that's the long and the short of it. So what I'm getting to here is maintenance people will know when you're going to hit these milestones where you have to do something major. For example, airliners, years 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, the maintenance looks like this. But, and if you were to look at an airliner, you might think, oh, well, next year 6 will just be a little bit more, right? Wrong. In year 6, you have to strip the plane down to the rivets and have everything inspected, and then basically you're building back from there. And I actually had a guy from basically China's version of the FAA, and he confirmed that they do that in China too. So it's all over the world. If you've got a 5-year-old airliner, your next year is going to be a very expensive year. And they have to do that every 6th year. Okay, so these are the kinds of things your maintenance person will know and be able to share with you. Now, I could also get these numbers from engineering. I could have the engineers take a look at the maintenance records. I could have the engineers take a look at basically the owner's manuals for the machine, so they'd know how many thousands of hours happen before you replace this and that and the other. And engineers can give me a similar set of numbers. But here's the interesting thing. The numbers that I get from the maintenance department will always be lower than the numbers I get from engineers. And there's two reasons for that. Number one, what kind of machines do maintenance people like?
Ones that are broken and busted.
Yeah, broken and busted. They like old machines. And the reason is because old machines require more maintenance and there's the opportunity for overtime. I'll give an example. When I worked in the nuclear power plant, our boss was a former nuclear sub-commander. And he was fond of, when that problem hit the fan, he was fond of saying, "All hands on deck." So the problems would always crop up at 4:30 on Friday afternoon. Why? Because the operators and the maintenance people, they all got overtime. They were hourly, and it's at 5 o'clock, their 40 hours is done. But if they can find a problem that requires all hands on deck, they get overtime. Now, what about engineers? Do engineers get paid that way? No, we were on salary. So when 4:30 rolls around, we're 30 minutes away from Miller time. And what happens? Now we're stuck out there working on this problem, right? And so here's what was really, it was just a perfecto thing. He made the mistake of allowing us to have a flexible work schedule. And so all of the engineers, we changed our hours on Friday from 8 to 5 to 7 to 4. Because if you weren't there, could you answer the all hands on deck call? No. And so we were able to get out of it that way. Now, let's talk about engineers on the other hand, and engineers in a manufacturing setting. Do engineers like old machines or new machines? New machines! Oh my goodness, the challenge of finding the right machine, the challenge of figuring out how we're going to install this thing, where's all the electricity going to come from, you know, all that stuff. And then the day that the machine finally shows up and you take the crate off of it and you open the door and you stick your head in and you go, you guys ever stuck your head in a new car and smelled the inside of a new car? Does it smell good? Oh yeah, it's that new car smell. Well, engineers get the same kind of high out of smelling the inside of a new machine. It smells like machine oil and love. It's beautiful. Now, as a result, what do you think engineers are going to do? They're going to inflate the maintenance numbers so it will be more cost effective for you to replace the machine sooner. So I've got liars over here and I've got liars over here. What do you think I should do?
Lie.
What's that?
I said lie.
No, I'm looking for the truth, man. Take the average, right? You got these people lying saying they're 6'2". You got these people lying saying they're 5'10". Probably what's the average height between the two? 6 feet. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's where these numbers come from. Okay, now let's see. Let's go year by year. So we know that right now is time 0. If I sold the machine right now, I could get $4,000 for it. But if I say hold on to it for one more year, I'm going to have to spend $1,000 in maintenance. And I could sell the machine at the end of the year for $2,500. What's the sign that I need to put here?
Minus.
Yeah, minus, because it's a cash flow in the opposite direction. So far, minus $1,500. We're actually making $1,500 by walking away from this thing, except for one thing. What did we have to forego at time 0 in order to be able to make it to time 1? Yeah, we had to give up $4,000. But it's not just $4,000 because it was $4,000 one time period ago. So in order to figure out what the present value of that money is, I have to take this future, or this, what the future value of that money is, I have to take this present value of 4,000, multiply it by 1 plus r to the t. 1 plus r is 1.15, and it's to the first power. So we really don't have to do anything with that. And so when I do my math out, that's actually $4,600. Now, I just need to put these three numbers together. 1,000 plus 4,600 is 5,600 minus 2,500. This all comes out to be 3,100. Now, what number are we going to compare that to recognize whether or not we need to replace the machine? Yeah, the EAC of the new machine is $2,859.95. What should I do? Should I go ahead and replace the machine at time 0, or should I let it run another year? Yeah, I need to replace it because the EAC at time 0, or the equivalent annual cost for holding on to it one more. The equivalent annual cost is lower than the cost for hold on to it for one more year at time 0, so we're going to go ahead and replace it at time 0. Now, let's assume, for the sake of argument, that instead of being 3,100, this was only 2,700. So we would, in theory, according to the book, we would go on to the next year. And here's what we would do. We would say, okay, it's going to cost us $2,000 in maintenance to hold on from time 1 to time 2. What salvage value could I get at the end of time 2? Yeah, 1,500. But what am I having to give up in order to go from time 1 to time 2? Yeah, 2,500. But is it just 2,500? No, I've got to multiply by 1.15. See, 2,500 times 1.15, so that's 2,500, 2,750, 2,375?
28,700.
2,875, thank you. Yeah, it's got to be greater than this, right? 2,875. Okay. So 2,875 plus 2,000 is 4,875 minus 1,500. I think I get 3,375. Is that right? Okay. Now this is greater than that, so we would go ahead and replace it. Now, I told you that that's what the book says. In fact, the book says that you just keep going until you figure out what year, based on your current numbers, what year that the cost to hold on to it for one more year will be greater, and then you just basically make a notation in your calendar, oh, by the way, replace that machine at that point. I'm going to tell you that's not the best way to do it for a couple of reasons. Number one, do you remember how much trouble I had getting numbers out of Rusty beyond 1 year? It turns out that the further out you go forecasting things, the harder it is and the more off you are. And so what I would rather do is work with numbers that are close in. So here's what I would recommend to you, is that you go out and you gather the present and time 1 numbers. And so basically just the first 2 lines of that table, 0, 4,000, 1,000, 2,500, and you go ahead and get your quote for the new machine. And you figure out the equivalent annual cost, and you compare it to the cost to hold from time 0 to time 1, and you make your decision there. And if it doesn't need replaced now, here's what you do. You get out your phone and you set yourself a calendar reminder for 1 year from today. Reevaluate replacing machine 237 for 2 reasons. Number 1, we know the forecasts close in time are more accurate. And number 2, do you think it's possible that the price on the machine has changed in the meantime? Yeah, and in fact it's possible you might choose an entirely different machine that would have a different set of expenses associated with it. And so that's what I'm going to tell you to do, is that you look at this every year, current time, time 1, every year until it's time to replace that machine. And then hopefully you could take a break for a few years. By the way, most of the machines that I worked with, I started in 1997. The newest machine that I had was built in 1979. And so machines can go a long time before they need replaced. We actually had machines in Duncan, Oklahoma, this is the mid-90s, that had been used to produce bomb parts for World War II. They had still the United States Ordnance stickers on them where they had been certified for use for producing bombs for World War II. Machines can last a long time. So is there a real possibility after 1 year that you'd be thinking about replacing it? Probably not. If so, you bought the wrong machine. Does that make sense? Was that the end of the set of slides for chapter 8?
Yeah.
Good. Apparently the computer thinks that I took too long to talk about that. Okay, now we're on to chapter 21. Oh, wake up. I'm trying, it's not paying attention. Ah. Okay, here we go. We're going to talk about mergers and acquisitions. So the basic concept here is we're going to take two or more organizations and we're going to put them together to create one.
Yeah, so I didn't understand what we did in the replacement example. So when we got 3100,
Uh-huh.
so that means to be replaced in the year for one because
At time zero. At time zero. Because here's your choice. Do I spend 2,860 for the next year with the new machine, or do I spend 3,100 for the next year with the old machine? Which would you rather do?
Yeah, the new replacement.
Yeah. And then what probably confused you is said, okay, let's assume though that it did not come out higher. Let's assume it came out lower. Yeah, and then I threw out 2,700. What if it came out to be 2,700? What would we do? Well, we move on to the next time.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay. Now, mergers and acquisitions. Did you guys know that we are merging two colleges on this campus? We are merging, which two are they, Mr. Mars?
All the Arts and Letters of the College of Humanities.
Yeah, the College of Arts and Letters and the College of Humanities and Public Affairs. Because it turns out the longer your name is, the more likely you are to get merged, right? And so then they decided, yeah, because we're the College of Business, and people are like, yeah, we're not going to mess with them, right? Because it's very short. We're taking those two organizations and we're putting them together. That's really a merger. Now, in this case, we wouldn't call it an acquisition because one of those colleges isn't buying the other one. But that's the idea behind a merger. So let's talk about some vocabulary here. The bidder is the acquiring firm. So, for instance, right now, Amazon is trying to buy iRobot. Do you guys know what iRobot makes?
This is the vacuum cleaner.
Yeah, Roombas, right? So iRobot makes Roombas. Amazon's trying to buy them. Yeah, and I'm going to make our final discussion is going to be about how the courts are saying Amazon shouldn't be doing that. We'll discuss why that is. Okay, so in this case, Amazon would be the bidder because they're the one trying to do the buying, and iRobot would be the target because they're the ones that Amazon's trying to buy. And then we talk about consideration. Consideration is what the bidder is offering to the target's shareholders, because that's who owns the company, right? That's what they're offering to the target shareholder in order to get them to agree to the acquisition. And the most simple one would be cash, but it can be cash and securities. The security is usually the company's stock, or it could be purely the company's stock. And so we basically have three scenarios: cash, stock, and a mix of stock and cash. And we'll discuss the benefits and costs, benefits and drawbacks of all of those. Okay, now let's talk about the concept of the takeover. Takeover is a pretty broad term, and it includes a lot of things. And so I drew this little tree, and we're going to talk about all these things individually, but I drew this little tree so you'd understand that all acquisitions, proxy contests, and going private, those are all different forms of takeovers. Acquisitions you can further break down into mergers, consolidation, acquisition of stock, and acquisition of assets. And once again, I'll go through all those things for you but this is kind of shows you how they fit together, how these concepts fit together. Now, what is a takeover? A takeover is when control passes from one group of shareholders to another. And so let's talk about in an acquisition. You've got the bidder and you've got the target. If the bidder wins, they're going to buy the shares of the target shareholders, and the control of that target firm now shifts from the target firm shareholders to the bidding firm shareholders. Does that make sense? So that's why that's a takeover. And then we're going to talk about proxy contests, and we talked a little bit in chapter 6 about voting proxies for stock. In a proxy contest, and I think we've already mentioned one of them in our discussions. Did I mention Disney in a proxy contest? Yeah. In a proxy contest, it's a different group of shareholders take over, not because of that they bought the shares, but because they convinced other shareholders to join in with them. And then finally, going private is where you just go out and you buy up all the shares and you take the company off the stock market, and so you're taking control from the target shareholders and putting it in the hands of not a publicly traded company, but of a group of an individual or a group of individuals. But I'm going to talk about all of those. Any questions so far? Yes?
So when you acquire a company, are you like buying all of the existing shares, like a call option?
Oh, okay. So when we acquire another company, do we actually have to buy all of that company's shares? And the answer is no. Well, so we don't have to have the approval of all those shares, and we'll get to that. Yeah, no, it's not a call option. Let's say that you hold shares in iRobot, and I'm Amazon. If this takeover happens, I'm buying your shares. And so, you probably, in fact, you might have sold before the whole deal went through. But long story short, when this is all said and done, iRobot stock will not be trading out there. iRobot will no longer exist as a standalone entity as far as trading goes. Yeah, we'll get to it. If you still have questions, let me know. Okay, so let's discuss the first one, merger consolidation. And this is the only time that we'll be making the distinction between these. The rest of the time, I'm going to call them both mergers. And the only time you would need to worry about this is perhaps one multiple choice question where I ask you the distinction between a merger and a consolidation. Other than that, really, you don't hear that much talk about it. So in a merger, one firm is completely absorbed by another. So if Amazon buys iRobot, iRobot is going to disappear as a standalone legal entity. That's just going to go away. So only one firm survives. I actually worked in one of these. Halliburton acquired Dresser. At the end, there was one corporate headquarters. It said Halliburton on it. There was one CEO, the CEO of Halliburton, and basically everything was Halliburton after that. So Dresser ceased to exist as a legal entity. That's a merger. Now, this consolidation is where two firms go together to form an entirely new firm. And in fact, Daimler Chrysler was one of these examples. If you go back to 1998-ish or so, you guys remember Chrysler, you could still buy what, the Chrysler 300? Chrysler, American automaker, number 3, perennially number 3. And Daimler, who does Daimler own? You guys ever heard of Mercedes-Benz? Yeah, that's who Daimler is, right? They're the parent company of Mercedes-Benz. And so it was so hilarious. They claimed it to be a consolidation, and they said it would be a merger of equals. Now keep in mind, they're already blurring this line between merger and consolidation, but a merger of equals. Well, let's talk about that. Mercedes-Benz builds high-quality, expensive cars. What kind of cars did Chrysler build?
High quality, expensive.
Cheap crap. And I can tell you because I bought my wife a Plymouth Neon. By the way, you can't even buy a Plymouth anymore, can you? I bought my wife a Plymouth Neon in 1997. What a piece of junk. Why did I buy it? Because it was cheap, right? Okay, on with the story. So they said they were this is going to be a consolidation, but almost always these things turn out to in effect be a merger. And here's my proof. Afterwards, the head of Mercedes-Benz North American operations, do you think it was someone from Chrysler? Guy named Dieter Zetsche. Does that sound like a good Irish name? No, that's a German. Okay. And then the head of engineering, German. I mean, you just go one after another, and it's German, 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 German. And it lets you know that basically this was Chrysler, or Mercedes swallowing Chrysler. Now, here's the interesting thing. Have you ever had food poisoning?
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Oh, okay. So, food poisoning, it manifests itself in one of two ways. There's this way, and there's this way, right? So, let's talk, this is more pleasant. Let's talk about this way. How do you know when you've got food poisoning symptoms this way? How do you know what it is that made you sick? You guys have probably never thought of this, have you? Have you ever had food poisoning?
No.
Yeah. So when you threw up, did you recognize stuff in there and you're like, wow, that hardly digested? That's what made you sick. Your body's smart, right? And how did I learn this? I ate at a vegetarian Hare Krishna restaurant in Prague. Who would think that you could get food poisoning from vegetables, right? Apparently you can. Okay, so my point to you is this. When you've got food poisoning, your body's smart, won't digest that, and when you throw it up, it looks almost exactly the same as when it went down. And the same thing happened with Daimler Chrysler. I think we fast forward to like 2002, and Mercedes goes, and they threw up Chrysler. They spun it off, sold it to a private equity firm. And when they did, you know what? It looked almost exactly like it did the day they swallowed it. So, long story short, was that a good merger? No. And we're going to talk about what makes managers make stupid decisions like that. And it's not uncommon. In fact, it's very common for managers to make stupid decisions like that. Now, let's talk about the advantages and the disadvantages of mergers. So, first of all, they are legally simple. And let's talk about why a merger is legally simple. If we have the legal merger here, then we don't have to retitle all the assets of the target firm. What is a title? So how many of you own a car? What's the proof that you own that car? The title! And so all assets of any real value have this thing called a title. Lawnmowers don't, cars do. So it kind of gives you, or motorcycles do even. So motorcycles do, lawnmowers don't. So there's your title difference, right? Now, let's think about if you had a company with lots of assets and you went and bought it and you did it in a way other than a merger, you would have to go retitle all those assets. How many of you have gone down to the DMV to try to get a new title or get a title changed or anything like that? Raise your hand if you've been there. Ms. Rafael, was that a pleasant experience? No. So there you are in that room with those folding chairs, and the people around you, were they normal looking? No. Did they smell normal? No. Were their conversations enlightening and pleasant? No. Long story short, oh, by the way, was it a good use of your time? No. Okay, so nobody wants to go do this. And imagine doing that for lots and lots and lots of assets. That's a big pain. It's very expensive, so we would prefer not to do it. And if we go through a merger, then we don't have to do that. And so it's going to have a lower cost. Now, what's the disadvantage? Well, first of all, the target could have what's called a supermajority provision. And a supermajority provision says it's not just 50% plus one of the shares that have to vote in favor of the merger. It could be 2/3. It could be 3/4. Now, we're not talking about 2/3 of the shareholders. We're talking about 2/3 of the shares. If you had one person that owned 70% of the firm and they agreed, that it's real easy, right? But typically, we have, with corporations, we have what's called atomistic shareholdings, meaning that, for instance, I own 10 shares of GE. That's 1/billionth of GE. I own 1/billionth. And there are a bunch of other people that own equally small, crappy shareholdings. How easy do you think it would be to get 2/3 of those shares to vote in favor of a merger? Most of those people don't even realize what's going on, right? You could have shareholdings, and I've got shareholdings in probably around 1,100 companies that I don't know on any given day what's going on with them. And so chances of me knowing how to vote on this thing, or if there's even a vote at all, very low, right? And so this kind of creates a hurdle to doing a merger. And obtaining those votes might not be easy because the target managers are likely to resist. Put yourself in the position of the target CEO. Someone's trying to buy your company. What's your first instinct? Are you like, yeah? No. What are you thinking?
Why?
You're like, whoa, look out. In fact, if they take over your company, what's likely to happen to your job? Yeah, you're going to get fired. Do you have a question?
Couldn't a target company just delete the shares?
Oh, we'll get to that. Yeah, the poison pill. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's so much fun. Okay. Oh, yeah, there's all sorts. And by the way, chapter 21, I'm going to be giving you the best illustrations of how people are scumbags. We're going to see scumbaggery on scales that you had never dreamed imaginable. But we'll do that next time.